All right, well, I just want to welcome everybody to this inaugural meetup for the NativeScript JAX meetup. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to play around with NativeScript. I know I'm enjoying it. We have an interesting presentation today with some very special guests from Telerik. If any of you have played around with the groceries app, the Getting Started app, we have TJ here to TJ VanToll to talk about that, or to talk about some of the Angular stuff, and also Jen Looper, if you played around with her NativeScript Snacks. I've been using that little video presentations to help you get started and help you get over some pain points, and those have been really helpful. But in order to leave a lot of time for questions and answers, we'll go ahead and get started. So I guess TJ, you're going to start out.
Yeah. Thanks for having us. Yeah, just to provide a little background as to I guess what we'll be talking about. This is actually a talk that Jen and I will be giving at ngConf later this, early May, so in a few different weeks. And the whole talk is about sharing code between web and native apps, and specifically doing that with Angular 2. And so I think Skip introduced us, but we both work as developer advocates for Telerik and work on talking about NativeScript in talks like this. So Jen, you want to set the stage a little bit more for what we're building?
Sure, and just to say hello, my name's Jen, and I'm here with TJ to talk about NativeScript. And both of us are actually started out as web developers and kind of have migrated into the mobile sphere. But the premise of this talk is that we're kind of running a cooking show. So if anybody's ever been to ngConf, it's a completely insane kind of atmosphere. Last year there was a guy who yanked off his pants and had gold hammer pants and did like this NC hammer dance, and it's just like this atmosphere. So we wanted to create something that would be kind of fun and engaging. So we're going to basically be cooking as if we're in a cooking show. So we're going to be cooking a 3-course meal for you today, and I'm introducing myself as Chef Jen, and TJ is Chef TJ. And what we're going to do is we're going to show how you can take NativeScript and Angular 2, mash it up together, and generate apps for Android, iOS, and also the web, and how much code you can share between those different platforms that might simplify your life as you go down the road of building your mobile apps. So that is what we're going to show you today.
Yeah, and I'll also mention that just because of this format, if you do have any questions, feel free and go to meeting here. There's a little questions area where you can ask questions, and we've got Dan monitoring that as well. So feel free to jump in and ask questions, and we'll take them either during or we'll answer them after we're done with this presentation. And so with that in mind, with this idea of building 3 different apps, I guess one question that we get a lot is, well, why would you do this in the first place? Why build for native at all when you could just build for the web, for instance? And what a lot of data shows, and this is based off some research that this guy named Luke Wroblewski, hopefully I'm getting his last name right, but pretty famous guy that works for Google and does a lot of research into this sort of thing. And basically what he's found is that native and web each have their place in the software development world. And what native is really good at is providing sort of really rich, really engaging experiences that users or people that use their device tend to use native apps an order of magnitude, and I think this graph says 18 times more than they use the mobile web on their device. So building for native lets you tie into that, basically the best that you can get out of your device and provide the most engaging experience you can. But that doesn't mean the web doesn't also have its place. The web's mark in this, or its unique characteristic, is that the web is everywhere. You're not limited by certain device types. Everything runs the web. And as such, the web can reach broader audiences. You don't have to worry about certain regions. All the restrictions that come with native, they're just not there with the web. It's more of an open environment.
So just to reiterate what Luke Wroblewski has said, just to differentiate that the web is for audience reach, and native apps are for rich experiences, and both ways of building are strategic and both are valuable. So when it comes to mobile, we're not talking about web versus native, we're really talking about both, and this kind of ties into what we're talking about today with regards to code sharing.
Yeah, because as soon as you, if you do decide that that's the path forward, that building for both of these platforms makes sense for your company, your business, your service, whatever it is you're doing, you have some challenges ahead because traditionally building for all these places meant that you were dealing with multiple code bases, but not only that, dealing for multiple platforms. Oftentimes you'd have different development teams, and then once you introduce different development teams, all of a sudden you have this issue where you have to keep features in sync, coordinate, and it becomes a big mess. So what the approach we'll be taking is, good, the GIF's working here.
Oh, I'm so happy. So yes, so this is exactly what we're going to do today, except with TJ's iPhone. And what we're going to be doing is taking NativeScript and Angular 2, mixing it all together, and creating, next slide please, an Angular. Now I actually aren't quite sure what to call this, but it is basically a beautiful entree of NativeScript with Angular 2 flavors. So let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah, and if anybody has a way of coining this term, because NativeScript and Angular 2 doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, and Nangular kind of sounds really silly. Jen did notice that we could make the acronym like not a number, NAN, out of this, but it's also not the greatest thing to be associated with. If anybody has any ideas, let us know if you're a master of naming things.
That's half of software development right there. So, is there a question?
Oh, yeah. Any questions at this point?
Oh, okay.
There's one question. It's better left to the end. It's not actually the topic you're discussing, so go right ahead.
Okay. Well, on the menu today, I'll let TJ present our menu for today.
Yeah, so I mean, basically what we'll be doing today, we sort of divided this content up into sort of 3 different sections. We're first going to talk about how to start with the web, start with Angular 2. And then our entree, our core meal is talking about how we can take some of these code and these concepts over to building a native app. And then for dessert, we'll talk about different approaches that you can use for building for these platforms. And so with that in mind, I'm going to take the slides out of the way and bring over my editor here. And I've got this project here and this project over here. Now,
so while you're getting started, I'll just preface what TJ's doing, just like filler while we wait for the simulators. So it's a great idea, right? That we can write something once and run it everywhere. And this is one of the reasons people are so attracted to Angular 2, because with NativeScript you can use the code that you wrote for the web to deploy for Android and iOS devices, and you can create not just a a responsive website or a mobile app running in a web view, but a truly native app that looks and feels like what it is, a native app, and that's what NativeScript offers to the table. So here, TJ is showing something on the web.
Yeah, and so there are multiple different ways that you could approach this. So put yourself in the shoes of someone that's been tasked with building an app both for native and for the web. Now you could put all of your code in a single code base and come up with ways of sharing different files. Now for this example today, what we've done is we've actually put our code into 2 completely separate folders, code bases here, mostly so that we could compare these things side by side. So what we have over here on this side of the screen is the groceries web app, which you can see this is a pretty simple web app. If you've went through the Getting Started guide, you've seen this before. This is basically just a web interface to the same thing where I can add items to my list, and I have the code for it over here. And on this side we have a simple start of a native app that at the moment, if I drag over the emulator here, just says hello world, hello NativeScript, and that's all there is to it.
So already it's looking like a very plain dish, and just wondering if there's any kind of HTML that we can use in the web app, whether we can use that in the native app.
Yeah, and So if you look, if you are a web developer before and you've never seen NativeScript, then this code is going to look a little bit strange. You're more used to seeing, and let me bump this up a few notches. Let me know if this is hard to read, and I can keep bumping it up a little bit. But if you're a web developer, you're probably used to seeing things like this, things like divs and labels and all of these types of things. But those things aren't going to be available in NativeScript. With NativeScript, remember, you're building native apps. This is an Android emulator here running a native Android app. So I can't exactly take this code if I just tried to grab like a heading, for instance, and just toss this in here randomly. NativeScript's not going to know what to do with it. So if I were to bring over my console, I actually get an error. We'll see if this, it just doesn't show anything because it doesn't know how to parse this element. There is no H1 in the native Android app. It's a web concept, so it's not something that you can directly transfer over. So
replace the label,
so instead, let me get this over here. Now, you have a few choices at this point, right? Like, if I were, say, in a single code base, I could take my template property here, and if this is my component decorator here for an Angular 2 app, I could take my template. There's Boolean checks so that I could know whether I'm running in a web or native environment. Or I could point a template URL property and say, this is the template I want to use for the web, and this is the one I want to use for native. For now, I'm just going to bring in a different template here. That just shows sort of a native equivalent of how you build this sort of thing. It's still pretty basic at the moment, and that should refresh so that you can see how this works. But you can see that there's some foreign concepts if you come from the web, stack layout, text fields, buttons, but that you're able to build a similar sort of interface, again with Angular 2 APIs here, but reach a native Android target.
Right. So okay, so we can't just take HTML and slap it in here. We have to, make it a little bit more NativeScripty. We have to make it available for NativeScript to understand and parse. But I mean, can we at least make it look a little bit more similar to the web app? I mean, remember how nice that looked? This is so vanilla. I mean, not that vanilla isn't good, but oops.
Yeah, and if you look. Yep, and if you look at the web app, how it's styled, you'll see, again, some concepts you might be familiar with, font awesomes being used, different CSS rules. And if you go over to the native app over here, you can see that the structure is quite similar. In NativeScript, we support an app.css file for any CSS rules that you want to apply globally, and we also let you apply styles at the component level as well. Now, one caveat to that, even though if I paste in a little bit of CSS here just so you can see what this looks like in NativeScript, you can see that the syntax here, kind of like in Angular 2, and I have to make one last change to make that actually take effect, is the same. You again use selectors to select different UI components. You use name value pairs to apply rules. But because that we're running in a native app, NativeScript, what we do is we have to translate every single one of these CSS properties that you see here into their native equivalent. And because of that, we can't support all of the CSS rules that you see here. So from a code sharing perspective, that means you can share certain things. Like if you had a color scheme that you were using from the web, that is something that you'd be able to import. You can see we support CSS's import statement. We also support Sass and less pre-compilation, like if you had some sort of variable file. But a lot of this is sort of necessarily different because you're targeting different UI components and you're really building a different interface for this world. I don't know why this isn't, we'll see what it didn't like here.
So I'm looking very closely in this tiny little screen, but I see that there is a platform.android.css. So that looks like something that's maybe targeting Android. Can we take a look?
Yeah, so another thing we do is I'm just trying to fix this. I think I screwed something up prepping for this. Screwed up my demo so that we can actually see the CSS changes. I think that'll do it there.
There goes my thing. There you go. Yeah.
But in addition to being able to fork being able to show CSS, we have the native code here and the web code here. I mean, we also have the concept of being able to branch your code to apply different CSS rules for Android and iOS.
Right, because Yeah, because Android Action Bar, for example, looks completely different than the iOS Action Bar.
And
that's a good
again,
thing.
the idea here is, yeah, giving you the ability to create really the best possible or the best customized interface for all these worlds. So we're sharing a bunch of code and approaches and how we build this, but still maintaining the flexibility to target specific platforms when we need to.
We had a question.
Yeah.
Sure.
Nathan's direct question is NS router providers and main.ts. It is syntactically incorrect. We can't parse it, but maybe you know what it means.
So hold the phone. We're going to talk about the router in 2 bullet points.
Clarification. He was suggesting that may have been the issue. And now it's sorted.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yep. Yeah, there is a... We're working through a bug right now in terms of when these things are defined with as versus name, which is Angular 2 concepts. Sometimes it gets screwed up with how we're hot reloading the app because every time we reload this, we're basically restarting the Angular app, and sometimes it can get screwed up with as versus name, which is something that we're looking into right now. And I mean, just to provide a little background for those of you joining this webinar, in terms of where we're at with the Angular integration, right now the code in our Angular integration is considered basically like an alpha release, but we're nearing the stage where we're ready to call it an official beta. So as such, it's pretty stable. You can see, you'll see the finished product here in a second of what we're building here, but there's certainly still some outstanding bugs considering it's an alpha/beta release. So there's still some rough areas that we're working on.
We're getting close though.
Yep.
So do we have any questions on CSS, or can we move along? Looks like we can move along. Okay. So let's talk about something that I always consider the money proposition of this sharing of Angular and NativeScript code, which is solidly on the service tier. So when you have this nice login form, you need to have something happen when you press the sign-in button. You need to hit some kind of service so that you can get a token back and log yourself in. So it seems to me that the service tier, you can look at it as like a roux, which is the base of 3 of the mother sauces of classical French cooking. And everybody grab your Julia Childs and take a look, because with a good roux, you can build a bechamel, a velouté, and an espagnole sauce. So the point being, if you start with a solid base, you can create all kinds of greatness on top of it. So let's talk about the service tier. Maybe we could take a look at the code.
Yeah, and I'm going to paste in one other CSS update here that we can refresh as we start to build up. No, that was,
I was so excited about the sauce.
No, I should have pasted that in earlier because I wanted to show how you could also apply, this is another Angular concept of the style URLs and how you could apply rules at the CSS level. But then to get into services, I think this is actually the most exciting part of this, because if you see what's being done here so far in the login component, like we could share this code, right? We could say point the template URL at one place for my native app and in another place for my web app. And some of this code is somewhat similar, but there's a decent amount of differences in order to customize these elements for these different interfaces. But at the service level, and you'll notice that in this app that I have the shared folder here defined, and this code is literally shared verbatim. It is just copied and pasted between these 2 applications. For instance, if I opened up this grocery list service here, oh, not the map, the grocery list service here, you can see the code is just identical, literally copied and pasted. And this is all the code that does things like hit the back end to authenticate users here, and to show it in action, I've got an updated version here to paste in that brings in one of those services I just opened, the user service, and just another change that says as soon as you submit this app, and if I drag this back over, hit this button here to go ahead and hit this back end, and in this case at the moment it's just showing an alert just to show the pass-through works. But the key is that this is the exact same code in the back end that was running when we went over here and hit this button. We didn't have to rewrite that twice.
Yeah. Actually, I think Burke has done a similar kind of exercise, taking a to-do MVC code and just like swapping it over to work for NativeScript. So something to think about. Yeah. So there's a lot of shareable code. And people are starting to create examples around that as well. So we're hitting Everlive, right, which is Telerik backend services, but you could certainly share a service tier and log into Firebase or Couchbase or SQLite. There are lots of options there.
Yeah, anything you want to put behind these APIs, if you wanted to use a NativeScript plugin, one of these other backends, it really doesn't matter. We're using Angular 2's HTTP service directly. So anything that makes possible, anything NativeScript possible is fair game to use here and to share across both of these different interfaces.
Okay, so now that we have our service tier set up and beautifully shared, I would hope that when you log in, you wouldn't just see hello, you would go to the next page. So maybe we should talk about the router and navigation and how you can have a strategy to share code in that scenario.
Yep, and so what I'll do is I'll just paste in a little bit of code here first, and then we'll sort of show how it works. So the good news is that routing is, or at least at an API level, and I can bring up where the router is actually defined here in both the web app and the native app. You can see that these files are almost identical with a slight difference here. And the difference is in both this router directive that's brought in from NativeScript and then the use of this page router outlet instead of the router outlet that's used in the web app here. Now the reason in NativeScript that we have our own router that's, you can see it's basically identical to the Angular router. The APIs are almost identical. But the reason is because there's some things that are specific that you have to account for when you're building a native app. Routing just works differently. If you are writing for a web app, you are in a browser. There are URLs, there are hashes, there are things that are specific to the browser that the router takes care of. And in the native app, although some of the concepts are the same, the ability to have routes that you can go back and forth to, the details are different. Like on Android, if I sign in here, you expect things like the hardware back button to work on your Android device. You expect on iOS to have the little slide animation, the ability to hit the little back button and swipe to go back and forth. And that's what our router provides out of the box. So I guess the good news is that even though there are slight differences in the API, you can see they're fairly trivial. But for you as a developer, this is fairly abstracted away from you. You still get to deal with these same Angular APIs at a fairly high level, and your code is nearly identical.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that navigation is one of those topics as well that's just really fraught between standard web, mobile web, native development, hybrid development, because nobody really wants to see a hamburger on the web. I mean, there's just people just get crazy about this stuff. So I think that this is the one area where, yes, you could make everything work exactly the same, but really it's not the best idea in the world. That's arguable. Maybe other people on the line have other opinions about this, but we have arguments. So now that we've talked about the router navigation, do you want to pause for any questions?
Any questions, Dan?
There's a question about whether it seems specific for someone using Angular 2 and does your subject matter also pertain to those just writing with XML and pure vanilla JavaScript?
Yes, that's a good question. I mean, really, there is certainly an amount of code sharing that you get just from using NativeScript's vanilla XML offering without Angular at all. Like, for instance, you could use your service layer if you had a layer of your web app that was not tied to the DOM that just hit some backend APIs. You could certainly bring that into a NativeScript app. I think Angular just sort of adds to the situation because you are coding to similar APIs. Because, for instance, with routing, there's no way you could really share routing code between your NativeScript XML app and your web app because they're just two completely separate concepts. You'd be using, in NativeScript, you'd be using the frame module to do your navigation, and on your web app, there's no equivalent of that. So with Angular, that just sort of bumps up the level or the amount of things that you're able to share concepts. So you can see these are nearly identical, and these classes here are the same, and just coding to the same APIs as well. Just there's more equivalence between the two.
Yeah, I would think you could also share certain layouts and CSS styles on the front end.
Yeah, certain CSS, the CSS you should be able to, like, especially like colors and variables and such, you should be able to share regardless of which approach you're getting. You're not getting a ton from Angular there.
Yeah, that's just the look and feel. Yeah.
Layout,
all right.
Layout is the one hard one, just because, I mean, that's the one thing that's definitely unique here. You really just can't even, you really can't take web layouts, things like position absolute, flexbox. Like native just has a different way of positioning elements, so that's the one thing that regardless of your approach, you're still going to have to lay those things out in NativeScript and tell NativeScript how to lay out those elements on the screen.
Okay. So moving on, I guess it's time to take a look at adding some garnish to our app. It's starting to look really good, right? We saw that we have a nice login and we get to a nice list. So maybe we should take a look at some of the really cool little touches that we can add on the native side with NativeScript. So it's like we've talked about what Angular adds to NativeScript. Now we can talk about what NativeScript adds on to the whole experience. So maybe we could take a look at some animations.
Yeah, so I mean, if I bring over my two apps here, remember back to our earlier discussion where we talked about how native is really about providing rich experiences. And if you're just going to create, it's sort of silly, in my opinion, to just create a native app that does the same thing in the same way that the web app does. If you want to go through the hassle of building a native app, you really want to do something to provide that rich experience, to provide something that's really engaging for users. And the great thing about using NativeScript is you have direct access to all those things. So to give you a few ideas, and we'll go from a few silly things, a few practical things. For instance, one of the things I can do is NativeScript provides easy access to tie into native animations. So on devices tie into things like the GPU to drive these things. And I'll start by just adding a little background here that just sort of scales out to add a little effect to this loading screen. Just slight little polishes to make this thing a little more interactive and engaging for users. I mean, another thing you can do in native apps, and something I've pre-set up in this, is if I log in, Native has some really powerful list view components. Actually, oh, there it goes. Of really powerful list view components. So there's a lot of things that are just built into this. So things like being able to swipe to execute, endless scrolls, that sort of thing. And one thing I've pre-added to this is if I add to my web list over here, head over to this list, I can pull to refresh. These things are just provided in native out of the box. So you'd be silly not to use them to enhance your experience. And the final thing, now remember, groceries isn't necessarily the greatest app to show off how to push a device to its boundaries, but we can get a little creative. So one of our community members, Brad Martin, if he is on the line, hi, created this little explosion NativeScript plugin, which is spectacular for demos. So what I'm going to do is just to show off the sort of thing that NativeScript makes possible, even if it's not practical in this case, we could bring in some animations that you just can't even conceive of being able to do on the web because they really need to happen at the bytecode level. So I'm going to bring in this plugin, and instead of actually submitting, that's kind of boring, we're instead going to kick off a series of explosions in this application.
Awesome. I can't wait.
And when this syncs, I have this set up so the first time this thing is going to make the logo explode. You can see it just sort of blows up here. And then the next time it's going to blow up the container. And then there's a timeout set up to blow up the entire application so that it just goes away.
Very nice. I think that's totally useful.
Right. So practical advice for you to take back for building for your apps. But the key is, really, even though you can share a lot of this code and concepts, when you're building for native, it's really powerful and really important that you know that you do have access to these features and that you're able to take or leverage those to build the best possible app you can build.
Fantastic. So,
and
Are there any questions about animations, or are we ready for dessert? The cake is coming. Okay, well, I just want to give a nice shout out to another one of our Telerik developer experts, Nathan Walker, who wrote this unbelievable seed project which will allow you to get started quickly creating apps with NativeScript and Angular for a desktop, web, iOS, and Android. And it's pretty unbelievable. You should just take a look at the seed code and just encourage you to start building.
Yeah, and the cool thing about that is, like, if we look back in here where we had two separate code bases, really what the seed projects tries to do is provide some of these conventions out of the box so you don't have, like in this case, how the shared folder is literally copied and pasted, to have some conventions so that you can keep your code in the same repo and sort of in a way that's optimized to share as much code as possible.
It's fantastic. Thanks, Nathan.
I mean, that's really all we had for this presentation. If you are interested in this, so again, I mentioned that this is a talk that we're going to be giving at NGConf. If you go right now, if you want to try this out, try NativeScript and Angular out. If you go to nativescript.org/Angular, there's a little bit more information on using NativeScript and Angular together. And there's also a link. I can actually just go to it real quick. There's a link to a guide that we've been working on that's linked to right here that eventually will be on the NativeScript docs within a few different weeks, but it's at this point it's still in like a first draft preliminary stage. But it's a pretty comprehensive tutorial if you want to learn more about what we talked about today, more about building apps with NativeScript and Angular. Set aside some time and go through this. And if you do, I'd love to have feedback of what you think about this as well. But it'll take you through a fairly comprehensive walkthrough of building apps this way.
And you'll wind up with groceries, the app we just saw, so that's great.
Yeah, builds the exact app we just saw. And then other ways that you can keep up, if you're interested in NativeScript, and Angular, the NativeScript Twitter account is a great way to interact with us and the entire NativeScript team. We will be giving a workshop at NGConf. I don't know if there's tickets still available, but if you are coming, we'd love to see you there. And then I'm TJ VanToll on Twitter. Jen is Jen Looper on Twitter. If you have questions after this that come up later, feel free to reach out to us there. We can help you out.
Yes, and you can maybe join us on Slack. Do we have a link to the NativeScript Community Slack channel? I've got it somewhere.
That's a good idea. Oops.
I've got a NativeScript cheat sheet here. It's yeah.
Yeah, if you go to nativescript.org and you go to Community Slack channel, you could drop in there, and then most of us that are on this call hang out there, so feel free to drop in there.
TJ, I had a quick question.
See you there.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Skip. When you were showing like the services, and I know I've looked at that Angular seed project, which is very helpful in getting started. But in practice, having also done Angular in the past, and back when I was doing that, was actually doing Ionic and trying to use that code base together, we tended to separate it. So I just wondered, is that more of a, would you consider that best practice to keep your two projects together, or use something like a private NPM repository like Sinopia or something to share like the service code that you're looking at? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah. It's hard to give generic advice about that because I think it's sort of on a case-by-case basis, because to me it depends on how similar that the code for those two apps is going to be. Like if you expect your UIs are going to be fairly different between your two applications, in that case I would think that you might want to create two separate code bases and come up with some way of sharing that code. It could be a private NPM repo. I mean, it could be something as simple as just you version off your code and pull it into your app in some way, your service tier or whatever code that you want to share. So I think it depends, and I think it's something that we're still experimenting with too. I mean, this is still fairly new, so it's hard to have really I guess I should say established best practices for something that's new, because we're still sort of figuring it out ourselves. I mean, I almost think that, go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, I was thinking that it also depends on the size of the team working on the project, because like when I was at Sun Life, you know, we had like 10 people working on like one chunk of the iOS bit, you know, so you might want to have, you know, you might have your service layer people like have that code isolated, and then you can have like branches of the code, you know, so that your teams can work on it, or your people.
Exactly. That's kind of what I was getting at. I expected that kind of answer of being kind of new and still feeling things out, but yeah, I just didn't know if anybody, because I saw that and I thought, you know, that's really great for getting up and started fast, but I just wondered, like you're saying, Jim, when the projects get bigger and stuff, how do you manage that and everything? But I guess that'll all come out as it matures.
Yeah, and my initial thought would be that I think it makes sense to start with one code base just because it's easier. And then when you hit that problem, when you reach the point where it's just unmanageable, then that's the point to probably just break it up.
Right. Thank you.
Sure.
Were there any other?
Yeah, were you thinking, are there any other questions, or are we thinking we're going to maybe get out here early today? We get out of class early.
We did have an earlier question. Actually, here's a new question. What's the overhead on NG2 versus vanilla JS and NativeScript?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head. One of the things that we're working on, I say sort of the reason that we still have an alpha flag on our Angular release, is compressing the JavaScript code that comes packaged. Because if you've worked with Angular 2 before, you probably know that when you install it via npm, you get a lot of stuff, a lot of TypeScript code, a lot of JavaScript code. You get the crazy npm dependency tool chain that it all brings down. And so one of the things that we need to get in place before we release is basically a good compression scheme that can just get rid of all of the stuff that you're not using. And the good news about that is with TypeScript, it's, at least with TypeScript and Webpack, I don't believe that's all that difficult. I think what we're working on right now is just making that integration somewhat seamless. And so because of that, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I know we are planning on stripping away the code that's not being used. So because of that, I would hope that it would be fairly minimal in just the sheer size of the JavaScript code that you need to run Angular and the handful of dependencies that it has.
Yeah, just optimize.
Great. If there's any other questions about Angular and NativeScript, please post them in the pod. So one question is, I have a little experience with Angular 1. I did not start with Angular 2 yet. Do you think it's better to start learning Angular 2 first before I combine it with NativeScript?
I personally would jump straight into Angular 2 because it's unless you have a ton of time and you just are really curious and want to learn both, which is great. I was actually in the same boat. I built a huge app in Angular 1, and then I got so discouraged and upset after NG Europe last year when they said they were going to scrap everything. And so I've just like let it slide, and I've started to just completely relearn from ground zero the Angular 2 stuff because it's different enough that there's a bit of a learning curve. I would start with Angular 2.
Yeah, and I'll say that I actually think NativeScript is a great way to learn Angular 2 because it's sort of it's something that you can use and sort of experiment with, especially if you have like a little app idea, something that you want to toy with on your own. It's a way that you can learn these APIs to try building something, at least something that I find sort of interesting with NativeScript, and then apply those concepts that you learn to Angular 2 web apps if and when you get around to building those for your company or whatever. So it's actually, it's how I learned Angular 2 was building with NativeScript rather than through the web.
Yeah, it's like a lot of us jumped onto Ionic because we're curious about Angular 1, so it's like you take your medicine one way or another.
Okay, so we had a question about Firebase. This might be tangentially related, but it says, I saw the new NativeScript app in iOS App Store this morning, but it still doesn't support the Firebase plugin natively. How can I include that plugin in my NativeScript code so it will work in the NativeScript app?
So I have successfully built, and I blogged on the Firebase blog about using the Firebase plugin within a NativeScript app. Are you specifically looking for a NativeScript app using Angular? Is that the hang-up, or I'm not quite sure where the pain point is.
Sounds like it might be the NativeScript app for the platform. Is that correct, Dan?
That was not specified. Brady, are you talking about platform? Yes, he is talking about platform.
Yeah, so that might not be included in platform, is it?
Geez, so we just had a platform release, and it's like a major release. And let me I'm going to log on to my account. I want to see if that if that plugin's in there.
Yeah, and if not, we'll just have to follow up. And for anybody that's not following along with that conversation, we also support building NativeScript apps through the Telerik platform, which is our paid tooling at telerik.com/platform. And one of the things it lets you do is pull in plugins from the NativeScript plugin marketplace, which I had open over here to show the Firebase plugin. And specific support requirements, I'm not sure Jen is checking on that. And but there was a release that happened just yesterday. But if we don't get back to you here, just feel free to reach out to us on Twitter, and we'll get to the bottom of it.
I see it. I see NativeScript plugin Firebase version 2.1.4. So I would think that it would work. Give it a shot. Let me know. Can you ping me on Twitter? Because I'm curious. Yeah.
So just going to check it out.
Is that what the strategy is, to use all these approved plugins in the NativeScript app for the platform? Include them?
It's more that they're integrated directly, because you can also with the platform use plugins from npm and what's the plugins.nativescript.rocks.
I thought to use them with the app though in the App Store, they all had to be preloaded on the app, on that application, right? Is that not the case? They can be loaded dynamically?
So you do have to build with these applications, with these plugins in. So they do need to be built in to the application.
Because you initialize them and use them.
Right. So if he's using the app that you guys have in the App Store, those plugins won't be available in there.
Oh, you know what? I think you're talking about the companion app.
Yes.
Companion app. Yes. That's what I'm trying to say.
Got it. Okay. Sorry. Where's like terminology? Oh my goodness. Sorry about that. Okay. So some plugins you can use in the companion apps and some you can't. That one I don't believe you'd be able to use. Am I right, TJ? Unless they've changed that, because they also just did a release of the companion apps.
Yeah, I'd have to check to follow up on as to where we're at with that.
Normally, custom plugins you need to be building for a device.
Yep.
Right, and that affects the size probably that you guys can put in the App Store too, if you included every possible. But it seems like it might behoove you to include the ones that you approve there if that list isn't too big, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of just.
Yeah, well, the companion app. Yeah, the companion app is just for testing, and you're right that we can't just dump every plugin in so that we'd have like a gig-sized app that we put out for test.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
But yeah, and we have I should say there's ways that you can request these too. So if you had the NativeScript plugins, and I forget what they put the section here. But there's some way, like suggest plugins, let us know. So we listen to demand for these things too, and what people are looking for.
Cool.
Okay, so that's that, and that's the end of the questions. So I think we can wrap this up. We appreciate everybody coming to our very, very first meeting. And we will keep you posted on the next meeting. If you want to be a speaker, please let one of us know, and we'll work with you to get something put together.
Yeah, and if you have any suggestions about future, webinars or interesting topics, go ahead and feel free to forward those to us as well, either in the comments on the Meetup or, in the Slack channel, wherever Twitter, wherever is easiest for you. I'd like to thank TJ and Jen. It was a great presentation. Very informative, and good luck making this presentation at NGConf. Should be very.
Thank you. Should be fun.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.
Thanks. Bye.